The restaurant smelled faintly of fried oil and citrus cleaner, a strange combination that somehow felt comforting to the regulars and alarming to anyone with a sensitive stomach. Becky stood near the edge of the table, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair as if she needed it for balance. "Just so you know, I had the chicken tacos last night, and my stomach has been doing somersaults ever since," she said, her voice calm, but her expression uncertain, like someone narrating a situation she had not fully accepted yet. "But the specials look good. We have tilapia, which I am pretty sure is just a polite way of saying a greasy white fish floating in cheese." Dan did not even look up from the menu. "Please do not make me carry that image into my brain right before dinner." Darlene leaned forward, studying the laminated page as though it held the secrets of the universe. "Now that you mention it, that is exactly what I want. I am going exotic tonight." Beck. Neil, sitting beside her with the careful posture of a man who was trying not to disturb anything, smiled politely. "I will have the pupusas," he said, with a quiet confidence that suggested he had rehearsed the pronunciation. "Take me away to El Salvador." Darlene raised an eyebrow. "That is fried, and that is covered in some kind of chunky sauce. I cannot do that right now," Becky said, shaking her head slightly. "You go first." "Neil." "I am still looking." Neil nodded, then glanced back at the menu as if it might change its mind. "I would love the 3 shrimp tacos." "Pick something else," Darlene said immediately. Neil blinked. "I am sorry." Darlene leaned back, crossing her arms. "A lot of shrimp is peeled by children in terrible working conditions. So you think you are eating something fancy. But really you are just contributing to a system that should not exist." Neil froze, his menu halfway lowered. "Oh, I have an idea," he said after a moment. "What if I just had one small shrimp taco and felt bad about it? Have the chili relleno," Becky offered, trying to restore balance to the table. "They are really good here. And they are vegan." Neil smiled politely again, though it looked slightly strained. "I do not really like those." "No. You will," Darlene replied with certainty. Dan finally looked up. "Would you all hurry up? I am riding a wave of hunger here, and it is not going to last forever. I will have a shrimp burrito. And I will have Neil's shrimp tacos." Neil looked confused. "Wait." Dan shrugged. "I do not know if it is sweat or tears. But they taste great." Becky sighed, pressing her hand lightly against her stomach. "I am not convinced this is food poisoning." Darlene glanced at her. "I think you are hungover." "I am not hungover." "Hold on," Dan said, pointing his fork like a tool of investigation. "You are going to have to eat something. You and I have a meeting tonight." Becky opened her mouth to respond, but instead closed it slowly, her thoughts drifting somewhere else entirely. Neil cleared his throat, attempting to shift the conversation. "So, what do you do for a living?" Dan asked him. "I am a preschool teacher." Dan nodded thoughtfully. "Preschool? Is that like playing with blocks and things?" Neil smiled, this time with genuine warmth. "Actually, blocks are a very important part of early development." Darlene smirked. "The old ways are still the best ways. We try to inspire imagination with open-ended materials." Neil continued. "Objects that are not defined by gender or specific roles. Things that children can interpret however they want." Dan leaned back. "Why would you do that when there is television?" Neil paused. "Excuse me," Becky said suddenly, standing up a bit too quickly. "I just need a moment." She stepped away from the table, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should have. Darlene watched her go, then leaned closer to Dan. "He is great, right?" "Yeah." "Does he remind you of anybody?" Dan shook his head. "Not really. Here's a hint," Darlene said. "I want you to figure it out." Dan frowned, thinking. "David?" "No," Darlene said immediately. "Completely different." Dan looked toward the direction Becky had gone, then back at Neil, who was carefully folding his napkin. "Wait. That was not David?" "No." Darlene lowered her voice. She is doing the same thing again. He has that same nervous energy. The same way of looking at the floor like it might give him answers. Dan studied Neil more closely now. Meanwhile, Becky stood near the restroom door, staring at her reflection in a slightly warped mirror. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, then steadied. She placed a hand on her stomach again, this time with more intention. Something had shifted, not just in her body, but in the direction of her life. And for the first time that evening, the uneasiness she felt was not about food. It was about the future. When she returned to the table, the conversation had moved on, but the air still carried that familiar mixture of humor and tension that defined her family. Later that night, after the laughter had faded and the plates had been cleared, Becky would find herself standing in a quiet room, holding a thought she could no longer ignore. A thought that would change everything. I am pregnant, she would say, and nothing would be the same again.